Hey guys, it's Canadian Kyle here at the Wealth Orders Podcast, and today I'm joined with Dave Dinesen. He's the CEO of Cubic Farms, ticker symbol CUB on the TSXV. Dave, thanks for joining me on the Wealth Orders Podcast today.
You're welcome. My last name is pronounced Dinesen.
Dinesen, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I was wondering about that. Thank you, appreciate it. So typically I have experts in the mining industry on this podcast, but there's a constant saying in the extractive industries is that any physical things consumed are either mined, killed, or grown. So I really wanted to talk about agriculture, and this is an agriculture technology company. Now, before we get into it, I always ask my guests the same question. What were you doing when you were my age? I'm 25 years old, so what were you doing from 20 to 25?
Um, yeah, so from 20 to 25, I had started an investigation company. So I had learned, gone to a private investigation school and started a company with a colleague. Merged that with another one. It actually became fairly large here in Western Canada. And so that was sort of my first, real business foray, if you will.
Wow, that's pretty cool and unique. But how did you get into farming, supply chains, ag tech? How'd you get involved in that?
Well, after the investigation company, it grew quite large, and one day I got a phone call from a potential customer asking if we could do background checks, and I thought that is a focus within the investigation realm that I want to focus on. And so I actually separated from my partners and focused on that. The business became a company called BackCheck, and we grew to be one of the largest in the world. Um, and sold that in 2012, or merged it with a large U.S. competitor. Sold it again in late 2014, early 2015. Actually, Goldman Sachs, a division of Goldman Sachs, bought it out, and so I retired for about a year. And but for the previous few years before that, a friend of mine, who's a Dutch Canadian immigrant greenhouse farmer, him and his father had started a company called Vivo Farms that became one of the largest propagation greenhouse operations in North America. And as part of that, they started building this technology that would allow very, very efficient indoor growing at commercial scale. And I was watching this technology be developed and always said, boy, if I ever had the time, I want to get involved in that.
Yeah.
So after selling my last company, having a year of blissful retirement, but still had somewhat young kids, um, looking for something to do, my friend called and said, "Hey, do you want to take this to market? It's ready to go." So I raised some capital, put a team together, and that was 5.5 years ago. So
And that's Cubic Farms today.
yeah.
Very cool. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about the two technologies that you're currently offering there at Cubic Farms?
Yeah, so we're a local chain ag tech company. So we develop automated commercial scale growing technologies that let you grow commercial scale indoors anywhere on Earth. We have the two divisions. We have a cubic farm division, which grows plants, so lettuce products or salad products, if you will, herbs, microgreens, and then other plants. So we've cloned plants, we've grown tree seedlings, edibles, non-edibles, all sorts of plants that you can grow. And then we have another division called Hydrogreen, which is a company we acquired about a year and a half ago that grows live green animal feed. So literally growing grazing lands fodder indoors that you can grow at in very large quantities to feed livestock. So beef cattle, dairy cattle, race horses, camels, goats, chicken, water buffalo, whatever livestock.
Right.
Those are the two divisions. Yeah.
And I'll ask more about those technologies in a bit, but maybe could you educate us and maybe tell us some statistics about the agricultural industry and what needs your technology is actually helping?
Sure. Well, there's several issues at stake here. One is that at the moment, the world is a lot of places, including much of Canada, is solely reliant on food imports. And so one of the things that's happened is, of course, supply chains can be disrupted. And now you're somewhat at risk with respect to food security as a people group. Second of all, is that we're living in a world where the population is going to double in the next 40 years, and the world is already using all of the fresh water that's available for human consumption and agriculture. And we're already using 100% of the farmlands that are available for farming and for livestock. And yet we're actually losing farmlands, and we're even more challenged with fresh water, with drought and climate change. So if we're going to double our population, and most people seem to want to keep eating almost every day, we have to do something to grow way more food with far less water and far less land. And so these technologies are crucial for that. The other thing is that we're living in a sort of a long chain agricultural world where much of our food is grown centrally. For example, here in Canada, much comes from California and Arizona, and on the vegetable side and fruits, and so of course these places are running out of fresh water, and as well it takes an awful lot of diesel fuel and jet fuel to get that food to where people actually live. So the very thing that's driving a lot of the climate change, which is burning an enormous amount of fossil fuel, is the very thing that's putting food security at risk because of drought and climate change. Growing food is becoming harder and harder in these large centralized farms. And then, of course, we're shipping it ever farther distances, burning ever more fossil fuels. So the current situation that we have now just isn't sustainable. So we develop technologies that let you localize that food production at commercial scale in an automated indoor way. There's other statistics, such as roughly 2/3 of produce is wasted before it's ever consumed because it has to be shipped enormous distances. The amount of fresh water that's required to grow and then ship is simply enormous with traditional farming. And so, and same with pesticides, right? Pesticides are a necessary evil at the moment, yet they're not very healthy. Of all the
Nope.
products in the world, pesticide is the only one I've ever seen that warns you to wash your hands before you go to the bathroom if you've used pesticides. Well, that's pretty nasty. So, we've got to localize growing. We've got to reduce greenhouse gases. We've got to save fresh water. We've got to reduce pesticides in our diets. And so all of these things, and nations have to be food secure. So all of these things are driving the necessity to be able to localize food production.
Is one statistic worth mentioning too, that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I noticed that in Canada and the States, there's a labor shortage too, right? We have to bring people from different countries no one wants to do these jobs. So my question to you is, with this automation, do you actually see food prices being a little cheaper in the future, or do you think they're still going to be more expensive? What is your view on the price of food?
So you're absolutely right with respect to labor. Farm labor is getting harder and harder. There's no little boy or girl at school today that's running home and saying, "Mommy, Daddy, I want to be the best, fruit picker in the world." That's not happening. And so we need technology to feed us, no question. I think in the short term, food prices are going to continue to go up. But I think as these technologies mature, I think it is possible that they could become much more stable. Do I see them declining? Certainly not in the near term, but it's certainly not impossible. I mean, technology has been known to, drive the prices, down significantly once they reach scale. So, the technologies are still, I would qualify them somewhat earlier days, but they're getting there. Yeah.
And one of your statistics, you said, I'm a little confused. You said 100% of the water is used, or what was that statistic you mentioned? 100% of the water's.
Yeah. So in the world, of all the water that's in the world, oceans, lakes, mountain peaks, and snow,
Yeah.
rivers, streams, about 1% of the world's water is actually available and accessible
Oh,
for human consumption and agriculture. And we're using that 100%, or we're using all of that water that's available right now. And in fact, we're in a time of enormous drought. I mean, it's in the news every day, endlessly right now. And it's really affecting, all sorts of the world, but certainly agriculture.
seems like you guys have a necessary product that the market needs. But at today's market, is it competitive? Like if you were to look at local farmers that export their food nationally, and then other vertical and indoor farming, like how does your produce stack up on a cost basis?
So we focus on the technology and we sell that technology to farmers to help them be successful locally where they live. So we're, similar to an indoor tractor, but a very fancy one, if you will. That's where we play. So we're on the technology side. Right now, for example, in Canada, um, several of the crops that our technology will grow, you can only turn over those crops once or twice a year. Whereas using our technologies, you can grow them, all year round. And as well, you're not susceptible to climate change or disease or pests. So it's much more reliable. So you can literally start growing these crops in places where they've never grown before and they've had to import. This is
Right.
sort of the point so you could have a farmer who's today growing, a crop that does well in that region, but now they can diversify and also start growing something that's never grown locally or not grown reliably annually with that consistency. And that's really what, is going to help localize sustainable farming.
That makes sense. So what's the demand like with these units right now? And what about the sales pipeline and the markets you're targeting? Like you say, some markets they need the food. So is that where you're targeting right now?
Yeah, so we're right now on the cubic farm side of the business for growing plants. We're focused on farmers who are going to be growing salad products. So there's a real acute need. We're eating more and more salad products as a society, and yet there's been more and more challenges with supply. So there's been several recalls in the last few years where with listeria and salmonella and whatnot. So that's caused all, and then climate change has really impacted yield, and then supply chain disruption. So all of these things, and it's a short shelf life, high volume product,
Right.
right? It's not like, some crops last, you can ship a potato almost anywhere and they last a long time, and even an apple and even a tomato or a cucumber, like there's some products that have a longer shelf life that are very shipping friendly,
Right.
but there's lots of short shelf life, high volume crops. So those are the things we're initially focused on with the cubic technology.
Okay. And by markets, I meant like you're not just focused on Canada. Like where are you putting your efforts all around the world?
Sure. So we're initially focused on North America, and we have sales into both countries now. But in 2022 and 23, we'll be expanding internationally. We announced a deal going into Australia recently, and then there's other markets that we have, that we're working on expanding to. And for the Hydrogreen, the live green animal feed side, we have installed in Canada and the US, and there's a real acute need right now because of drought for the Hydrogreen technology. It really helps farmers, especially doing beef and dairy, to be able to, have better animal performance and use far less water, reduce greenhouse gases. So animal health, environmental health, quality of product, all these things are significantly helped. But we have also installed one system in Italy to a farmer that's raising a water buffalo for buffalo mozzarella, and yeah, so there's a significant demand for this type of technology globally, but for the next year or so, we will still be mostly focused in North America.
I was preparing for this interview and I looked at your company's corporate presentation, and the deck showed that you're touching on the leafy greens and stuff, but I actually got excited over your company over the hydrogreen technology, because that agricultural feed is actually a much larger industry, isn't it?
Yeah, well, if you consider how many animals there are that need to be fed, and they need to be fed every day, and it's getting harder and harder to, raise livestock because of drought. And then more and more, I think consumers are demanding that animals be treated well, and they're demanding that, their protein sources are sustainably farmed. And so, luckily, the hydrogreen technology addresses, water usage, land usage, but because when you feed animals with live green animal feed, they absorb all those nutrients, all those enzymes are readily available. And that animal will absorb all those nutrients as opposed to passing, those nutrients through in their waste. You know, we know that livestock farming contributes to about 14.5% of the world's man-made greenhouse gases. So, feeding an animal with hydrogreen will significantly reduce their greenhouse gases. There was a paper, it's on our website, um, that Dr. Lenore Newman published on the benefits of feeding animals with this kind of feed in reducing greenhouse gases. Yeah.
Now, with that hydrogreen technology, I watched the video and I was wondering, what is it, a contract or what happens? Because there's seeds that you place on the bed and then you water that bed and it produces the livestock feed, right? But then all of that gets used as the end product. So where do you get all that seed from and to start that process?
Yeah, so we're a large seed purchaser. But right now, so many farmers are just feeding animal that grain or that seed, right? And
Oh,
so
okay.
because we have a process that we're able to then sprout it, that nutrient is much more readily absorbed by that animal. So for example, if you ate a bowl of popcorn and you didn't pop it,
Yeah,
most of the nutrients in that kernel is passing through. Whereas if you pop it, your body is able to absorb those nutrients. This is the same kind of principle, right?
okay.
Which is why grass-fed, beef or grass-fed milk or organic grass-fed beef or, these things are much better products. Well, this technology allows all farmers to do that.
That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, that explanation. And yeah, for me, I was looking at I guess it's the drought issue that's the biggest issue here, or I'm just wondering how much livestock feed is actually shipped around, because I would think if you have a lot of livestock, you better have the fields to feed them. But am I completely wrong with that? Most of it is actually transported feed.
Well, it's both. So you might be growing corn silage or alfalfa, or you are going to have your lands to be able to grow feed. But if you're in an area where there's extreme drought and you can't irrigate to grow the corn, you got to bring it in. And so, because this system is able to grow such an enormous amount of feed using such a small amount of water, and every 6 days, these machines harvest. It's an enormous amount of feed with a relatively small amount of water and a small amount of space. So you're in fact, and then because of how you're feeding them and how the animal responds, you're actually able to then have far more animals per acre,
Okay.
so that it actually becomes a bit of a real estate play for farmers. They're able to expand their farm, whereas maybe land isn't available to purchase if they want to expand, or it's too expensive to purchase if they want to expand. So it really does tick all the boxes, and it is where farming is going.
And do you have any clients that like are the hydrogreen systems just backup or emergency for the years of drought, or are they completely
No,
feeding
no.
their stock with that?
Yeah, so you would feed, 15 to 20% of the animal's ration with this live green feed every day. And that animal will perform better than they've ever performed.
Interesting.
Hmm.
The cubic farm unit, it's what was it, 8.5 feet by 40 feet by 9.5, or 8
Hmm.
by 40 by 9.5? Are those units stackable, or
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
are stackable? Okay, interesting. Because I seen a lot of them where they're all horizontal, but I didn't know if you could stack them.
Yeah, we haven't had a customer that's done that yet, but they absolutely are. I mean, that's just,
Yeah, because you need like a lift or something or a second floor.
yeah, if it's still farming, so we certainly encourage people to be on relatively inexpensive farmland, and so if you're able to, single level is typically easier, but you'll see double stacked cubic farms soon. Yeah.
Hmm. So you guys are a public company with shareholders and potential investors. Why should someone go with Cubic Farms and not one of your competitors? Because it is a huge industry, the ag tech industry, and it's going to keep growing, I'm assuming. It has to.
Yeah, so we're one of the few that are publicly traded. There's been a couple others listed recently, but there's not a lot of us. Probably the biggest difference between Cubic and most others is that we're focused on the technology side. And so we're focused on, we're founded by farmers, developing on-farm technologies to help farmers be successfully locally with commercial scale automated indoor systems. Most others are actually focused on, they've developed a bit of growing technology, and then they're growing produce, and then they're selling produce. So they've actually gone from being, technology player to selling produce. And that actually positions you to be competing with a very large incumbency of farmers. Whereas we're more focused on the tractor. So John Deere doesn't try and own every tractor they sell sell a tractor to. It's the same with us. We really are focused on the technology side. And so we keep reinvesting in the technology, further automation, more crops that we can grow, which increases our total addressable market. Yeah, so we think our strategy is quite sound for growing quickly. That being said, there's no one company. One thing that you realize if you start looking into the ag space is that it's enormous. There's never going to be one company that is going to, um, absolutely dominate absolutely everything. There's a few examples where you'll have some real industry leaders, like I mentioned, John Deere, but there's certainly other tractor manufacturers. There's a handful of big seed players, but then there's certainly lots of smaller ones. In the ag tech space, this indoor automated commercial scale tech space, we are one of the few players focusing on the technology. So I think that's what makes us a better investment than most.
For sure. For sure. And you kind of touched on it a bit about your R&D, because I see money does go to your R&D. Do you mind talking a little bit more about that if you can?
Sure. So that's probably our biggest area, which is what we should be doing, which is at this stage in the company's evolution is pouring our heart and soul into ever improving the automation and crops that we can grow, our software platform, our data capture platform, all of these things that really help our technology help our farmer customers knock it out of the park. So that's what we're really focused on, is just making the best automated commercial scale, growing technologies. Yeah.
Now, how limited is the cubic farm unit in like you're never gonna grow a tree in it. So like what
Well, you could
um,
grow a seedling for a
y-
tree.
that's what you do that a lot? Do you produce a bunch of seedlings and you close to where they're gonna be grown, or
So we've got a couple configurations of our machine. So it's a very powerful patent in that it lets us do something no other indoor farmer can do, which is we're able to have only one row of light, yet hundreds of trays of plants that move
Mhm.
throughout the system. And so that reduces our energy cost. And then because the plants move inside the machine, it reduces the amount of space it takes up. So every cubic foot of space is used for growing. That's the name, cubic farms. And then it drastically reduces your labor. And then it's a very flexible machine. So we have a few watering systems that we've designed and a few tray designs. So we can configure the machine to propagate. So propagate is taking a plant from seed to seedling. And one machine can propagate at least 2.5 million plants per year from seed to seedling. Now, it depends how big you want that seedling, but the point is that we can propagate almost any hydroponic plant. So if it can be grown hydroponically, we can propagate it.
and people
And
buy those because it's a better success rate per seed, or like that's why
so
someone would
prop,
buy the
so when you're germinating a plant, you
Mhm.
want a different, you usually typically want 100% humidity for a few days and perhaps total darkness and a different climate.
Okay.
And so you can optimize the environment for propagation using one of these machines to propagate. And then you'll simply transplant that seedling when it's ready into the environment that you're going to finish it in. So, there's no reason that a nursery or, tree farm or, there's lots of plants that you could propagate in this type of technology.
With just because we're talking R&D right now, I'm curious because I went to Latin America once, and you can't beat the fresh fruit from a tree that's fresh, like it's ripened on the tree. And you said 2/3 of the trans of food is rotten through, or yeah, is rotten through transportation, right? Is there any technology in that space that is helping that issue?
Well, if you've got to transport a short shelf life product thousands of miles before it's eaten, I don't know what you can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's certainly cold chain technology that helps things last a lot longer. There are sprays that can go onto products that help them last longer, how they're packaged, how they're shipped, how they're stored, all these things. And to give the industry enormous credit,
Right.
it does a very good job of it. But it does still experience an awful lot of waste, and it burns a lot of fossil fuels getting that centralized grown product to where people actually live. And so I think the point here is that we can't keep doing that. We can't keep exporting all of California's fresh water, burning diesel fuel to get it here. They're running out of fresh water. They're shipping long distances. That contributes to climate change. That contributes to the drought. It's cyclical. We literally have to wind the whole thing back.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. So you're an ag tech company, a tech company, you're reinvesting your money into research and development, but I'm just wondering, when do you see cubic farms being profitable?
I would say 2023. I think cash flow positive in 22 and profitable in 23. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. So you're in an industry with a lot of negative headlines, water scarcity, food, all kinds of these headlines. Are you optimistic about the future with our food supply chains?
Well, the negative headlines aren't about us. The negative headlines are about what we're doing in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that climate change is great for Cubic's business. Supply chain disruption is great for Cubic's business. Nutrition and pesticide is great. That's a horrible headline. That's great for our, like, you know,
You're the solution. Yeah.
in the world. So my last business was Backcheck, and we did pre-employment background screening, and we started that business in 1997. And in Canada, when we started that, it was hard to get traction in that industry because we would go and talk to the head of security or the head of human resources and say, before you hire people, would you like to do background checks? And they'd say, well, no, when we hire people, we just want to trust them and they're joining our family. And if we did a background check, they'd think maybe we don't trust them. And then September 11th happened, and it changed the paradigm for the rest of my generation and your generation. We will always do background checks, certainly for anything slightly sensitive,
Mm.
for employment. It changed the paradigm that we look through employing people, so that background checks went from being something that maybe banks did, but that's about it, to everybody does it. It's the same now with growing locally. And it's like I've seen this movie before, where there's a global event like a pandemic, and all of a sudden you don't have airplanes landing at every airport every 30 seconds. There's no planes flying. Ships are stuck in ports. Entire world supply chains were disrupted. So something we'd taken for granted forever in an instant changed. So now when countries are looking at food security, it's not just a nice to have to grow locally, it actually kind of is a must have. Stuff can happen. So now if you're a big food service group or a retail group or a food subscription service or even a consumer,
Right.
you want all of the environmental boxes ticked. You want things grown sustainably, saving water, grown locally, reduced greenhouse gases. You don't want to eat pesticides with your meal. And then you do want to make sure that food is available where you live. So all of these things have come together at this moment in history, where this kind of technology, this industry is not going away.
Did you see a rise in demand of your product when COVID happened? Did you see more inquiries about?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But they're, yeah, larger, more significant, and at a country level. Yeah.
very interesting stuff. I like this company. I like the idea of it all, and uh, thank you, Dave. It's interesting. I don't have any other questions. You answered them all. You got them all. I think it's time for the vault.
Okay.
So the vault, it's not available on YouTube until I get my subscriber count up, but it will be available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But it's not about cubic farms or yourself. It's more mentorship like questions where you could help us learn from your experiences. So let's get into the vault.
Yeah, I would say don't let youth be an excuse to not do something. When I was starting my first company, Backcheck, we were all 20. I was old at 25 and getting a business going because everyone else I was hiring was 22 and 23. And at one point I was finally 30, and I had a handful of 22, 23-year olds. And whenever I would, interview a potential investor or whatever, I always said the same thing. Oh, you've got to hire, way more, gray-haired people. And 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 I would leave meetings like that looking around, go, oh, wait a minute, I've already built the largest company of its kind in Canada, one of the largest in the world, and I'm the oldest person here. So maybe they're wrong. Like, sometimes new businesses need to be brought to life by people that don't know they can't. And I think that's where I didn't know that I didn't have all the skills and knowledge that I needed. So I would say that over time I did start hiring some more people that were older than me and wiser for specific roles, but I was still the CEO. And um, yeah, I guess I'm kind of meandering here now, but I wouldn't let age ever stop you.
Perfect. Well said, Dave. Thank you. I actually like my guest closing off. So if you don't mind, here's your chance to say whatever you'd like to the listeners out there. Close us off, please.
Well, I just appreciate you hearing the story, and hopefully you get excited about the future of localized food production. We need to do this as a species. We don't really have a choice. We can't keep doing what we're doing. It has to change. So I would encourage you, buy products that are grown locally and sustainably. Ask questions of your, where you buy food and things. Where did this come from? And are there pesticides on it? And is this, just don't be shy about that sort of things, because we have to change behavior. And it doesn't really have to cost much more, if anything more. So make these good choices, because we really don't have a choice. We can't keep doing what we're doing.
It's better to be preactive than reactive with this because societies break down real fast if there's no food.
It's pretty grumpy by lunchtime. Yeah.
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 Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Bye for now.